November 1943, Richmond, California. The air shimmered with the heat of molten steel. Sparks cascaded like orange rain as hundreds of welders moved across the vast skeleton of a ship that hadn't existed a week ago. Cranes swung overhead, lowering prefabricated sections with clockwork precision. A whistle blew, and the great hull trembled as it met the tide. A Liberty ship sliding into the Pacific, its bow gleaming under the morning sun. Onlookers cheered from the dock. Factory workers, mothers, veterans, too old for combat, but not for labor. They had built a vessel of war faster than anyone thought humanly possible. In just over 4 days, reporters scribbled the time: 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. Across the ocean, in German shipyards, shrouded by blackout curtains and bomb damage, engineers stared at those numbers in disbelief. They worked by hand, month after month, their production strangled by shortage and precision. Yet the Americans had turned shipbuilding into something mechanical, almost alive. A factory that breathed steel and rhythm. The Liberty ship's horn bellowed over San Francisco Bay, echoing a new kind of power, not of guns or armor, but of speed, scale, and unstoppable industry. By 1941, the world's oceans had become a graveyard. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic like wolves, sinking Allied merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. Tankers, freighters, and supply vessels vanished beneath torpedo wakes, leaving oil slicks and lifeboats scattered across the gray sea. Britain, cut off from its overseas lifelines, faced starvation. Ammunition, food, and fuel were running dangerously low. The Battle of the Atlantic was not only a contest of ships, it was a race of production. If the Allies could build merchant vessels faster than Germany could sink them, they could survive. If not, the war would be lost before D-Day was ever planned. When the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor, it brought something new to the table: industrial capacity beyond imagination. The U.S. had steel mills roaring at full tilt, automotive plants ready to be converted, and a labor force eager to fight in any way it could. But the challenge was monumental. The U.S. Maritime Commission estimated that hundreds of new cargo ships would be needed each year. And traditional shipbuilding methods were too slow, too costly, and far too dependent on skilled craftsmen. Conventional shipyards worked like old-world workshops. Riveters, carpenters, and machinists built hulls piece by piece, often in cramped coastal facilities designed for peacetime output. A single merchant vessel could take 6 months to a year to complete. By the time it left the slipway, several more had been sunk at sea. In early 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued a directive that changed everything. America would become, in his words, the arsenal of democracy. That meant producing not just planes and tanks, but the lifelines that carried them. The cargo ships that would feed every front from North Africa to the Pacific. The answer came in a design known as the Liberty ship. Officially, the EC2SC-1. It was a British design modified for American mass production. A 441-foot cargo ship, simple, rugged, and cheap. Its power plant was nothing extraordinary. A triple-expansion steam engine, old-fashioned even then. Its armament was minimal, just enough to deter submarines. But its real weapon was speed of construction. The U.S. didn't need masterpieces. It needed thousands of workhorses that could carry 10,000 tons of cargo across the ocean. And it needed them fast. Early Liberty ships took about 240 days to complete. A solid improvement, but still too slow for the crisis at hand. Something revolutionary had to happen. A shift not just in design, but in philosophy. That shift began on the American West Coast, in a place that had never built a ship before. A man named Henry J. Kaiser, a construction magnate known for building dams and highways, was about to prove that ships could be built like cars, on an assembly line, in a rhythm of steel and sweat that would defy everything the Germans believed about manufacturing. Kaiser's plan was audacious. Train tens of thousands of unskilled workers, break shipbuilding into prefabricated sections, and weld, not rivet, the parts together. No more painstaking manual fitting, no waiting for specialists. Every person would perform one job and one job only, over and over, until entire hulls rolled out like clockwork. It sounded impossible to traditional engineers, but the war didn't wait for tradition. Henry J. Kaiser had never built a ship before the war. He was not a naval architect nor a maritime engineer. He was a builder of roads, bridges, and the monumental Hoover Dam, a man of logistics and motion. But that background became his greatest strength. Kaiser understood something the old shipyards did not, that speed and organization could outweigh experience. In early 1941, he convinced the U.S. Maritime Commission to let him try his revolutionary approach. On the quiet banks of the San Francisco Bay and the Columbia River, he broke ground on new shipyards at Richmond, California, and Vancouver, Washington. Massive industrial cities within cities. Railroad lines ran directly into the yards. Steel, engines, and parts arrived on a constant schedule. Every tool, every torch, every crane had a place. There was no waiting, no gaps in workflow. Each Liberty ship was divided into over 250 prefabricated sections, built simultaneously in separate workshops. Hull plates, engine mounts, bridge towers, all assembled under covered sheds, then wheeled to the slipway and welded together like pieces of a puzzle. Welding, rather than riveting, was the keystone of Kaiser's miracle. It required fewer men, less time, and less weight. Riveting demanded 2 workers for every joint, one inside, one outside. Welding could be done by one, and by women or trainees after minimal instruction. By 1943, Kaiser's yards employed more than 90,000 workers, many of them new to industry. Housewives, clerks, teachers, and students became welders and crane operators. Posters read, "The man at the front depends on you." Training centers operated day and night, teaching thousands of recruits how to weld seams, handle torches, and assemble sections with military precision. To keep morale high and efficiency climbing, Kaiser built something unheard of in wartime industry: an entire social system around his workers. He created childcare centers, health clinics, canteens, and rest halls. He even founded the health plan that would later evolve into Kaiser Permanente. Every worker mattered, and every minute counted. At the same time, American engineers standardized everything. The Liberty ship design was deliberately plain. No curves that required special fittings, no luxury cabins, no decorative decks. Each vessel was built for one purpose: to move cargo across dangerous waters as quickly and cheaply as possible. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, German shipyards were mired in an entirely different world. Their factories were under constant bombardment from Allied aircraft. Supply chains were broken. Fuel, steel, and skilled labor were all in short supply. Even as German engineers boasted of technical mastery, they were drowning in complexity. Their submarines, though deadly, were slow to construct, often taking 8 to 12 months per boat. Their cargo vessels were built with painstaking craftsmanship, riveted and polished, but their numbers dwindled every month. The contrast could not have been sharper. In America, cranes swung over vast fields of steel, each yard operating like a factory of motion. In Germany, production lines lay in ruins, silent except for air raid sirens. By mid-1943, the United States was producing 3 Liberty ships every day. The Germans could no longer sink them fast enough. The Atlantic lifeline, once strangled by U-boats, now surged with steel convoys, Liberty ships laden with tanks, ammunition, and food. And in that rhythm of welding torches and factory whistles, America discovered something powerful: that industrial innovation could win wars just as surely as battlefield victories. The stage was set for a miracle of speed, the moment when a single Liberty ship, built in just 4 days, would shock the world and define the meaning of wartime production. The miracle of the Liberty ship was not just a story of steel, it was a story of people. For the first time in history, America's industrial army became as diverse as the nation itself. At Kaiser's shipyards, the workforce was drawn from every corner of society: farmers' sons from Kansas, machinists from Detroit, teachers from Oregon, and immigrants from Europe all worked side by side. Perhaps most strikingly, women became a vital force in the production line. They were welders, burners, and crane operators, jobs once reserved for men. Known collectively as Rosies, these women changed the image of the American worker forever. With scarves tied back and gloves blackened by soot, they transformed from homemakers to industrial soldiers. Each spark they struck was a message to their sons, brothers, and husbands overseas. We're fighting too. Many had never seen a ship before the war. Some couldn't even name the tools they were handed on their first day. Yet under Kaiser's relentless organization, they learned fast. Within weeks, trainees were producing flawless welds and assembling bulkheads that would cross oceans. The yards operated around the clock, 3 shifts, 7 days a week. At night, the shipyards glowed like molten cities. The air trembled with the hiss of torches and the clank of steel plates being hoisted into place. Workers called it the rhythm of the Liberty, a heartbeat of production that never stopped. Every completed vessel was celebrated with a launch ceremony. Bands played, flags were raised, families gathered as the hulls slid into the water, each one carrying a name, often that of a teacher, a farmer, or a civic hero chosen by the community. To many, these launches were proof that America's strength wasn't just in its soldiers, but in its citizens. Yet behind the noise and sparks lay something deeper, a sense of unity that the Axis could never match. In America, innovation flowed upward from ordinary workers, not downward from bureaucracy. Problems were solved on the floor: a fitter adjusting a misaligned plate, a welder suggesting a faster technique. These tiny moments of ingenuity multiplied across thousands of workers, accelerating the process until construction times fell from months to weeks, and finally to days. By 1943, every person in the yard knew they were part of something far larger than themselves, a mission to outbuild tyranny, one hull at a time. And as the shipyards roared on, half a world away, German and Japanese officers were beginning to realize just how impossible it would be to match that scale. Across the Atlantic, in the shipyards of Hamburg, Kiel, and Bremen, German engineers worked under the dim glow of blackout lamps. The Allied bombing campaign had turned the sky into a weapon. Every night, sirens howled as factories shuttered and workers scrambled for shelters. What had once been proud centers of naval craftsmanship were now targets on a map. Shipyards buried beneath rubble, machinery melted into twisted frames. Germany's naval industry, though brilliant in design, was trapped by its own precision. Each vessel was a masterpiece, handcrafted by skilled artisans who demanded perfection in every rivet and plate. But perfection was slow. And time was the one resource Germany no longer had. Their approach to production remained rooted in tradition. Blueprints were adjusted on the fly, fittings custom-made for each hull, every ship slightly different from the last. There was pride in that individuality, but it came at a terrible cost: inflexibility. Germany could not mass-produce its way out of the war. Meanwhile, American shipyards like Kaiser's turned that weakness into an art form. Their motto was efficiency, not elegance. Liberty ships were modular, identical, and ruthlessly standardized. Every pipe, panel, and frame was interchangeable. When one yard ran short of a part, another could supply it instantly. The U.S. Maritime Commission even published construction manuals, blueprints so simplified that any shipyard, anywhere in the country, could replicate them, and so, while German engineers measured tolerances in fractions of a millimeter, American welders were measuring output in hours. Kaiser's assembly line method echoed Detroit's automotive revolution. Ship sections arrived at the slipway already painted, wired, and piped. Teams guided cranes to lower them into place, welding the seams in minutes. What once required 1,000 rivets could now be done with a single line of molten steel. To German observers, this was industrial heresy, but to America, it was liberation from the limits of craftsmanship. Adding to the contrast was morale. In Germany, forced laborers and conscripts toiled in fear under rigid control. In America, workers volunteered, sang, competed for speed records, and took pride in seeing their ships sail. The U.S. workforce was driven not by fear, but by purpose. In 1943, a captured German naval report described the situation bluntly. The Americans possess an ability to produce ships at an incomprehensible tempo. This output is not a question of technique alone, but of spirit. That spirit, the fusion of organization, optimism, and innovation, was something no dictatorship could replicate, and it would soon reach its most dramatic proof. When Henry Kaiser's yard decided to attempt the unthinkable, to build an entire Liberty ship in under 5 days, and show the world what American industry was truly capable of. November 8, 1942, Richmond Shipyard No. 2, California. It was still dark when the workers began gathering, the cold bay wind carrying the clang of hammers and the whine of cranes. A massive hull loomed under floodlights, the SS Robert E. Peary. It wasn't just another Liberty ship, it was a challenge. Henry Kaiser had announced that his team would attempt what many engineers said was impossible, to build a complete ocean-going cargo ship in less than 5 days. Not repair, not retrofit, build. From keel laying to launch, newspapers called it a stunt. German propaganda dismissed it as American boasting. But to Kaiser's welders and riveters, it was a test of their will, their coordination, and their pride. At precisely 12:01 a.m., Siraden ein von Danader Twitters, the first keel plate was lowered into place. A flare of sparks erupted as welders sealed the first seam. From that moment on, the yard became a symphony of speed. 24 hours a day, 7,500 workers rotating in continuous shifts. Cranes swung sections like clock hands. Prefabricated blocks, already wired, painted, and tested, were dropped into alignment with only millimeters to spare. By the second day, the ship had taken shape. Her bow rose from the slipway like a monument of steel, her decks already fitted. Trucks carrying bulkheads and boilers rolled in from nearby yards at dawn. Women worked on deck plating while men fitted the engine rooms below, all synchronized through whistles and chalkboard schedules that mapped every hour of progress. Observers from the U.S. Maritime Commission watched in disbelief. No shipyard in the world had ever moved this fast. Even Henry Kaiser himself was seen pacing the catwalks at midnight, stopwatch in hand, inspecting welds with a quiet smile. On the morning of the 4th day, crowds began to gather. The hull was complete. Paint crews swarmed over the ship's gray flanks, stenciling the name Robert E. Peary in white block letters. Just before noon, the final inspection cleared her for launch. After exactly 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes, the wedges were knocked free. The great Liberty ship slid into the water, her siren echoing across the bay. Cheers erupted. Hats flew. Cameras clicked. The miracle had happened. Across the ocean, when news of the feat reached Berlin, German naval officers refused to believe it. 4 days? Impossible, they said. But it was real. a victory not of battle, but of imagination. When the Robert E. Peary entered service, she became more than just a ship. She became a symbol. Her record-breaking construction proved that American industry had achieved something unprecedented: the mass production of victory itself. By early 1943, Liberty ships were leaving American ports in convoys so vast that the horizon itself seemed lined with steel. Each carried a lifeline: tanks bound for North Africa, fuel for the Royal Navy, food for Britain's rationed cities, munitions for the Red Army. The Atlantic, once ruled by U-boats, was now thick with American hulls moving in endless formation. Every Liberty ship built meant another blow against the Axis. For every one sunk, 3 more took its place. German submarine captains reported with growing frustration that the enemy's ships multiply faster than we can destroy them. The math of war had changed, and it was now in America's favor. Behind those convoys stood not admirals or generals, but welders, machinists, and planners, people who had never seen combat, yet delivered its victory. American production was no longer measured in days or even hours, but in minutes. Each shift ended with another vessel nearly ready to launch. At the same time, Germany's naval power was unraveling. Allied bombers crippled shipyards in Hamburg and Kiel. Oil shortages grounded U-boats. Skilled laborers were conscripted for the Eastern Front. Even the Kriegsmarine's vaunted engineers admitted defeat against what they called the Flood of Liberty. Kaiser's shipyards became a model for the entire Allied world. Britain adopted modular assembly methods. Canada and Australia followed the American system of prefabrication. Across the Pacific, similar yards built victory ships, tankers, and troop transports with the same relentless rhythm. In 1944, General Dwight D. Eisenhower would later remark that the success of D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history, could not have been attempted without the Liberty Fleet. Each barge, each landing craft, each supply line existed because the United States had learned to outbuild its enemies. The real weapon was not hidden in a laboratory or locked in a secret base. It stood in plain sight, the American factory. Its roar replaced the sound of artillery. Its heat rivaled that of the front lines, and through its endless motion, the tide of war began to turn. The battle for production had been won. By the war's end in 1945, the scale of America's achievement was almost beyond comprehension. The United States had built 2,710 Liberty ships, enough cargo capacity to move millions of tons of supplies across 2 oceans. No other nation in history had ever produced ships at such speed, or in such numbers. These vessels carried the weight of the Allied war effort. They ferried fuel to Patton's tanks in France, wheat to Britain's docks, ammunition to the Pacific Islands, and relief supplies to liberated Europe. Without them, the invasions of Sicily, Normandy, and the Philippines would have been logistically impossible. Most Liberty ships served quietly, their names unknown outside naval records. They were not glamorous. They had no great guns, no heroic duels at sea. Yet they were everywhere. Gray silhouettes against stormy horizons, lifelines connecting continents. Crews affectionately called them ugly ducklings, but every sailor knew they kept the Allies alive. German U-boats continued their hunt, but the numbers no longer favored them. For every Liberty ship lost, 3 more joined the convoys. The balance of the Atlantic had shifted decisively. Even the once feared U-boat commanders, men like Otto Kretschmer and Eric Topp, confessed that the Americans had won the ocean through factories, not fleets. Henry Kaiser's shipyards themselves became national icons. His record-breaking techniques spread far beyond wartime production, into bridges, highways, and post-war construction. The spirit of speed and efficiency that fueled the Liberty ship era transformed American industry for generations. When the last Liberty ship was launched in late 1945, factory whistles across the nation fell silent for the first time in years. The war was ending, but its rhythm of production, the heartbeat of the arsenal of democracy, had already defined a century. And for those who had built them, the sight of the final hull sliding into the sea felt less like an ending, and more like the closing of a chapter written in steel. In the years that followed, the Liberty ships began to fade from the harbors they once crowded. Many were sold, scrapped, or refitted for civilian trade. Their cargo holds that once carried tanks and grain now carried timber, coal, and machinery to rebuild the same nations they had helped liberate. Others served for decades longer, rusting but resilient, symbols of a time when speed had meant survival. Yet their legacy went far beyond steel. The shipyards that built them had transformed the American workforce forever. For the first time, women had proven indispensable in heavy industry. African American workers, long excluded from such trades, gained skilled positions and union rights. The lessons learned in those crowded factories of teamwork, equality, and shared purpose rippled through American society long after the war ended. Henry Kaiser's influence also endured. The health plan he created for his shipyard workers evolved into Kaiser Permanente, one of the largest healthcare systems in the United States. What began as a wartime necessity became a peacetime model of welfare and industrial responsibility. Meanwhile, in Germany, the post-war reconstruction revealed the staggering contrast. Shipyards that had once prided themselves on craftsmanship lay in ruins, their blueprints and traditions wiped away by bombing and defeat. In their place rose a new understanding. That precision alone could not win a modern war. Only adaptability and speed could. A handful of Liberty ships still exist today, preserved as floating museums. Visitors walk their decks, smell the oil in the old engine rooms, and listen to the echo of welds struck 8 decades ago. Each one carries the ghost of an era when ordinary people achieved extraordinary feats. For those who remember, these gray hulks are not relics of war, but monuments to the workers who outbuilt tyranny. One seam, one shift, one spark at a time. And in their endurance, the Liberty ships continue to whisper the same quiet truth that defined them in 1943. Strength is not in perfection, but in perseverance. The Liberty ship was never meant to be beautiful. It was never designed to inspire awe or admiration. It was designed to work, to be built faster than the enemy could destroy, to sail farther than the war could reach, and to endure longer than the fear that created it. In that purpose, it succeeded beyond measure. Every rivet, every weld, every seam told a story, not of warlords or generals, but of welders, machinists, and dockhands who believed that their labor mattered. The shipyards of Richmond, Baltimore, and Portland became cathedrals of democracy, where men and women from every background forged not just vessels, but victory itself. America's Liberty ships were proof that in total war, power was not only measured in guns or aircraft, but in the ability to produce, to adapt, to turn chaos into coordination. Their story is a reminder that technology alone does not change history. People do. Ordinary people who rise to impossible demands and refuse to fail. For Germany, the Liberty ship became a symbol of what it could not match, the industrial unity of a free society. While Nazi engineers clung to precision, Americans embraced practicality. While one nation perfected form, the other perfected function. In that difference lay the fate of the war. Today, when one of the few surviving Liberty ships leaves port, its engines slow, its decks crowded with veterans and families, it carries more than memory. It carries the essence of a moment in history when an entire nation moved with one purpose. The sound of its horn rolling across the harbor is not just nostalgia. It is the echo of a time when factories became front lines and blue-collar workers became the architects of freedom. Because in the end, the Liberty ship was not just a vessel of steel, it was a vessel of will, a testament to what humanity can achieve when necessity demands speed, and courage fuels the flame. That is why, 8 decades later, the name still fits. Liberty. It was never about the ship itself. It was about what it carried, not just across oceans but through history.